New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube. Welcome to I Know You Didn't Ask. I'm your host, Megan O'Donnell, and I am so excited to be here for part 2 of my George Santos deep dive. If you guys haven't listened to part 1, go back and listen to that. That's where we talk about who George is, who George says he is, and all of the things that led up to him winning a seat in Congress in 2022. Also, if you guys are new here, I'm on YouTube and Spotify, so be sure to watch the video version. I'm looking particularly cute today. Again, hair in a slick back bun, which is always the same situation. Dirty hair. But we are on YouTube, we are on Spotify video, we are on TikTok, Instagram, everywhere at Megan the Podcaster. So be sure to check me out, follow me, and follow me especially on TikTok because that's where the kids are. And that's where the money is. So that's where I'm going towards. So part 1 ended on January 7th, 2023, the day that George Santos was sworn in as a member of the House of Representatives. So before George Santos even took office, he was facing media scrutiny from both the left and the right to resign. And it's shocking that this is one of the only topics that both Republicans and Democrats can completely agree upon at this point. It is the fact that George Santos is not qualified to be a U.S. congressman. So fast forward a little bit, March 2nd, 2023, a House committee announces an investigation into George Santos. And so he had been in office for about 2 months at this point, and there had been a 10-member bipartisan committee who voted unanimously to begin a proper investigation many times over that his resume did not get him the job. It's like, yeah, but it kind of helped get you the job, you fucking charlatan. Fast forward a little bit, on May 10th, George Santos was charged in a 13-count federal indictment in the Eastern District of New York. Prosecutors submitted over 80,000 pages of documents proving that George was a scam artist. And he was accused of many things. We're going to get into the nitty gritty, but up top, he was accused of 5 counts of wire fraud, 3 counts of money laundering related to a campaign finance scheme, 1 count of theft of public money, 2 counts of wire fraud related to unemployment schemes, and 2 counts of false statements from both his 2020 and 2022 campaigns. So let's dig into this a little bit because this is where the fun begins. I told you guys part 2 is a little bit more fun than part 1. I hate to be biased, and I'm not putting down part 1, but part 2 is a lot more fun and juicy. So according to the indictment, during his successful 2022 congressional campaign, George, along with another person named Person 1, engaged in a messy scheme to solicit funds to support Santos's campaign through a fake political fund called Redstone Strategies. He misrepresented Redstone Strategies to donors, basically telling them this is a political support organization that is going to be helping him get into the role of congressman. However, again, this is George Santos we're talking about, people. It was not properly registered, and it was not functioning as a true campaign fund. So impressionable Long Islanders and even other Republicans outside of New York who just wanted another Republican to come in and flip the seat contributed to this bullshit account. And then, of course, some of the funds from Redstone were transferred into George Santos's personal account. House investigators found at least $200,000 moved from Redstone to personal bank accounts associated with George Santos in 2022. So what did George Santos use his stolen campaign funds for? I want to party with George Santos after we go through this list. So obviously he's traveling to the Hamptons, where he did mention in some interviews that he spent a lot of time going up to the Hamptons as a child, and that's where he, grew to love surfing. George, love you, mean it, but you do not have the build of a surfer. He had stayed in 5-star hotels in Miami, in Manhattan, and various places in DC. He loved to gamble, which in the book I talked about in part 1, they talk a lot about his competitive bingo playing. But he loved to gamble playing bingo, Uno, poker, and of course Atlantic City is right near New York. Of course he was going to pop down there, and actually ends up being kind of close to where he ends up going to prison. So I wonder if he stopped there after he was released. Caviar lunches at Bergdorf Goodman. And most shockingly, George Santos spent a pretty penny on OnlyFans, supporting curvy, big natural models. One in particular named Layla Lewis, who claimed that George paid her to rate his dick. I wish we could get the dick rating. I really should reach out to her and just say, do you have a picture? And you know what? I don't even need a picture. I'll take hearsay on the size of his penis. I'm going to think gonna say it's small. Of course, campaign funds were used to fill his face with Botox and filler, various spa treatments, and we all know George Santos was a fashionista. He was shopping at Ferragamo. If you know George, he's always in a Ferragamo shoe. And he also spent $4,127.80 in designer goods from Hermes. And if anybody out there knows Hermes, you can't get much for $4,000, so I'm wondering what he's picking out. If I were him, I'd be getting one of the beautiful leather-bound notebook cases that you could refill with new pages, when you finish your old notebook. That's what I would be spending on. And of course, campaign funds were used to pay his own rent and credit card debt. I can only imagine how much debt George Santos has. And while investigators were going through all of these fraudulent expenses, they kept finding many charges exactly at $199.99, which is 1 cent below the threshold that requires you to have receipts for campaign expenses. So George Santos knew exactly what he was doing when he was filling out these fake expense reports and whatnot. So let's jump into some of his other schemes. So there was the unemployment benefit scheme. And so before his unsuccessful 2022 congressional campaign, George ended up falsifying documents to obtain unemployment benefits. Supposedly, he said he was unemployed from March 2020 through March 2021. However, he was actually employed by a company identified as Harbor City Capital, where he did work from January of 2020 to April of 2021. This alleged unemployment scheme ended up netting him about $25,000 in unemployment benefits. However, he was making approximately $120,000 at his actual job. So, looking a little sketchy here, George. And prosecutors said they saw a few different unemployment payments that were actually sent to him, but had passed through interstate wires and were sent to computer servers that were located outside of New York. And so when you're on unemployment, you're really supposed to be staying in your state. One other thing that was a little sketchy is that this job at Harbor City Capital was based in Florida, and George actually announced his candidacy for his 2020 congressional run in Florida. So I do like that he was like, no, I'll be back in New York in a few days. Don't worry. I get I'm supposed to be representing New York, but again, I don't think George cared what he was representing, who he was representing, where he was representing. He just wanted to be famous and seen. So let's go through some false statements that George was reporting on the House Disclosure Report. So the final indictment alleges that George Santos lied on financial disclosures related to both his 2020 and 2022 congressional campaigns. So in May of 2020, George reported $55,000 from one company as his sole income. Okay, fine, whatever. However, prosecutors said that he overstated that number and also failed to disclose his salary from the Harbor City job that he held at that same time. And then prosecutors said that in September of 2020, Santos claimed that he was making a salary of $750,000 and had millions of dollars in dividends from his personal company that would then help him fund his campaign. And another layer of lies about how much money he actually had or doesn't have. They also said he was lying just about the general amount of money he had in his checking account and his savings account, and also did not disclose the unemployment benefits that he did fraudulently obtain during this period as well. So he was a true mastermind, able to hoodwink the government for a minute there. And it sucks because had he had not decided to run for Congress, he probably could have still been scheming and scamming to this very day. A few short months after the initial 13 charges were dropped, in October of 2023, he was hit with 10 more charges. Of course, vehemently denying the charges because how could he do this to his people, the people who trusted him? So George was caught falsifying 2022 campaign reports that were submitted to help him qualify for an RNC, a Republican National Convention program that would help him gain financial and logistical support from national Republicans. And so to qualify for a program like this, you need to have minimum fundraising totals, sufficient donor support or grassroots support, as well as submitting timely financial reports to FEC. We all know George. We love him. We love him here. I know you didn't ask, but he doesn't have a pot to piss in. And he didn't have any fundraising funds in a real substantial way. So George's already small and underfunded campaign could really have benefited from this program from the RNC. This program would have given him campaign infrastructure that he just simply didn't have. It would have helped with credibility for donors and voters, and it also would have allowed him to compete against better funded opponents. So much of campaign dollars go to, of course, like having, travel logistics for you to go to DC, for you to be traveling around your entire area, but it's also for marketing. We've all been on YouTube during election periods, and every other fucking ad is a political ad. It costs a lot of money to get your ads blasted out on television or on, digital marketing. And so having this type of program helping him really would have had a lot more people have eyes on his campaign. So, naturally, he falsified all of the reports needed to qualify. And so he ended up qualifying for these perks illegally, which effectively allowed him to unlock these resources without legitimately earning them. Again, which is the story of George Santos's life. He, wants to have this, impressive resume and this impressive education without actually doing the things to earn those things. And, George is the master of faking it till you make it, baby. He will do whatever is needed to reach his goals, even if it means lying. You only live once, George. We know he's a little questionable when it comes to his campaign funds, but unfortunately, prosecutors were able to find that George was actually charging donor credit cards repeatedly and without authorization. Of course, then taking that money that was stolen from these donors and then distributing it to his own bank account. Again, pretty brazen, especially in a world where everything is trackable. You'd think like he would have the wherewithal to think, maybe they'll be able to very easily track my Zelle payments. It's a bank and it's 2023 at the time. You can find anything online. Any move you make, any time you log into your online bank, they track that. So if you really thought you were hot shit enough to steal people's credit card numbers and charge them without their authorization and then take that money and put it into your own account and then go onto OnlyFans, you don't think people can track this? It's pretty fucking crazy. He was living a lie, and it's really so shocking that he thought he'd get away with it. So George Santos was actually released on a $500,000 federal bond after his arrest in May 23. And the people who guaranteed that bond were his father and his aunt. And imagine the two of them scraping together $500K. To be honest with you, if I was George Santos and got into the same troubling situation, my parents would never pay my fucking bail. They'd say, you're a lying scam artist. Live in prison. Like, they would not have, figured out a way to get $500,000 to get me out. But he should be so fucking grateful, because you got to imagine how embarrassed and disappointed they are in him. And they had to know he was a little scammer from the jump. Like, you don't just start scamming in Congress. Like, you've been living a life of scams prior to that, which we will be getting to. A lot of his non-political scams are frightening and disappointing again. I'm not mad, I'm just disappointed in you, George. So on November 16th, 2023, the House Ethics Committee released its findings with a scathing 56-page report that detailed substantial evidence that Mr. Santos had lied to voters and violated federal law. Ultimately, what George did was just waste taxpayer dollars by having this fraud as their congressman, wasting the time of many, many lawyers having to find, as I mentioned, 80,000 pages worth of criminal history. George simply was just wasting people's time, whether it was his donors, the lawyers who had to fight this case, everybody. Like, you just wasted time and government resources so you could have your 15 minutes of fame. So this brings us to D-Day, December 1st, 2023, only 329 days since his inauguration, and George is officially kicked out of Congress. The House of Representatives voted 311 to 114 to expel George Santos. You guys, our boy made history. Santos became the 6th sitting member of the House to be voted out by his peers and the first to be expelled without being convicted of federal crimes or for supporting the Confederacy. You guys, he's a trendsetter. I'm shocked it took 329 days of him being in office to officially get the boot. But hey, I guess better late than never. So in April of 2025, George was sentenced to 87 months in prison, which he would begin serving in July of 2025. So on August 19th, 2024, George Santos pleaded guilty to wire fraud and identity theft in federal court. With the plea, Mr. Santos agreed to pay nearly $374,000 in restitution and serve at least 2 years in prison. I allowed my ambition to cloud my judgment, leading me to make decisions that were unethical and guilty. And honestly, I like that George Santos just said, hey, I'm guilty. I feel like that's a lost art these days. Like, just admit guilt so everybody can move on. Let's cut the bullshit. Everybody in the courtroom, everybody watching television or reading the news knew that George Santos was guilty. Him admitting guilt just stops the collective pretending. Admit guilt. I think that's actually really cool of George. In April of 2025, George is sentenced to more than 7 years in prison. That is a total of 87 months. The judge told George, Mr. Santos, words have consequences. You got elected with your words, which were mostly lies. People voted for this man to protect them and to have their best interests at heart, but it was just not the case for them. He cared about moving up in the social scene, people knowing his name, and finally having the spending money to do what he wanted in life. Who doesn't want to get Botox filler and eat at Bergdorf Goodman for lunch? But he definitely did not care about the people he was supposed to be representing in the government, which is quite literally the point of being a congressman, is to ideally care about the people you work for. Granted, I'm aware of what goes on in our government, and sometimes people go into government for the wrong reasons. But again, we're not going there. Megan is not on her soapbox in part 2. I only did it once in part 1. I might have actually removed a few moments of me going off in part 1, but I'm learning, you guys. I'm learning how to have a slight unbiased episode. So let's forward to July 25th, 2025. George was set to begin his sentence at the Federal Correctional Institution in Fairtown, New Jersey. And this is really in the middle of nowhere in South Jersey. And this was a minimum security prison, so it's not too bad. It's like where Jen Shah was. But during his time in prison, he said it was a shithole. Like, duh, honey, it's prison. You guys, I did have to listen to a Tucker Carlson interview with George Santos on it, where he talked all about his time in prison. He said there were black mold on the ceiling. He said sometimes they didn't have air conditioning for the summer, which I do find quite inhumane for New Jersey in the summer. Oh my God. And in those orange jumpsuits, it must be so stinky in that prison. He talks about, where he fit in with the segregated groups in the prison. He said, am I a black man? Am I a Latino man? I'm a little bit of everything. And as we know, George is he's a raconteur. He's a storyteller. He's a cosmopolitan man. And he said he liked entertaining and cooking at home. So he said, I'm going to get a job at the cafeteria. And so he was working at the cafeteria, and he was like, you know what? I'm going to peel these potatoes. I'm not just going to chop them up and make mashed potatoes with the skins on them. He said, I am taking the time to feed my fellow prisoners and treat them with a little bit of respect. I will say, he was talking down about his fellow inmates to Tucker Carlson. And George was saying, oh, they have no table manners. He said none of my fellow prisoners would be caught dead eating at the French Laundry. George, honey, neither could you. And the audacity for him to be talking down about the other prisoners when they're all in the same place for a reason, because they're all criminals. But his tone with Tucker and Tucker's tone with him was like, can you believe you were in prison? Can you believe that you experienced this? How on earth could you have gone to prison? It's like he's a fucking criminal with 23 confirmed felonies. What is so shocking about this? We will also get to many more crimes this man has committed on a more personal level. And again, because George is silly and funny and has a great personality and is well spoken, he kind of in real time is scamming Tucker Carlson into believing every word he says to make Tucker feel like he's not sitting across from a criminal. You can see it happening in real time. It's quite fascinating. It's a masterclass in scamming, and I'm gonna be taking notes for the future. He did make cupcakes while he was in prison for people, and the guards would call him Cupcake, which I do believe is a gay slur. He ended up getting put into solitary confinement, aka the shoe, for 41 days, which is a very, very long time. Officials said that his placement in solitary confinement was for his safety and not necessarily as a punishment. He must have been such a loudmouth prisoner. Oh god, the other guys are like, can you shut the fuck up? We're just trying to fucking eat our breakfast and our fucking lunch. We don't need to hear Santos over here yapping nonstop about Bethany Frankel and the Real Housewives. We don't care. He said he read 26 books while he was in the shoe. He did say he suffered from suicidal ideations, having written 3 suicide notes since he's been released from prison, which I guess I just spoiled the next 5 minutes of me talking, but he has not been able to read those notes back yet. Again, fingers crossed, we get the notes in the book. 2026, A Girl Can Dream. While he was in prison, he also said he ate a lot of tuna, a lot of nuts. He said he had to ration a lot of food from the commissary. He said he wasn't going to pay $1.50 for ramen noodles. And I have to say, why are ramen noodles more expensive in prison than they are outside of prison? I found that to be very interesting. He also said they were given honey buns for breakfast. And he said, I don't eat honey buns. I'm watching my girlish figure. And you know what? Eat a honey bun, George. Most people go to prison and they come out ripped and jacked. You should have been doing crunches and, a classic prison workout while you were in solitary for 41 days. So you can also eat and enjoy a honey bun. I feel like I'd work out for 2 hours a day if I was in prison, but then I would, eat the fruits of my labor by enjoying a honey bun every so often. George did talk a lot about how shocked he was at how poorly people were treated in prison. And it's pretty obvious that in America we don't care about prisoners, and prisons themselves are kind of just ways for the government to legally have free slave labor versus trying to correct the behaviors of people. And we'll just have a little history lesson with Meg that the 13th Amendment abolished slavery except as a punishment for a crime. So after the Civil War, many southern states actually started arresting mostly black men on super minor charges, forcing them to go to prison, and then having them work in those prison camps for private companies who are profiting off of basically this free labor. Many prisoners now are working for free at literally $0 an hour or $1 an hour, working to, put together pieces of a fucking toy while they're, in prison for 15 years for selling an ounce of weed. But unfortunately, this little loophole in the 13th Amendment is still the legal foundation for the prison labor system today. And that's a whole other story. You guys want that in a Freaky Friday episode? I can really get deeper into the 13th Amendment. Kill me. I'm so sorry this is who I am. On George's 84th day of being in prison, October 17th, 2025, Donald Trump decides to commute George's sentence. In a social media post announcing his decision to commute George Santos' sentence, Trump calls him somewhat of a rogue, but said he believed that the former congressman's sentence was excessive given the nature of his crime. And what is the difference between a pardon and a commutation, which I had never heard of? So a commutation, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, basically says that, it reduces or eliminates your sentence. In his case, it eliminated it. And a pardon forgives a crime entirely. So George, who was commuted, his convictions aren't erased and he is not considered innocent, whereas a pardon entirely clears your conviction legally, but not, from public memory, and also restores your ability to vote, hold office, etc. So at least Trump was like, let's commute him and not pardon him so his little bitch ass doesn't run again for Congress. Because if George was fully pardoned, he absolutely would have attempted to run again. And his entire campaign slogan would have just been, oops, you got me, but I'm still the George you guys know and love. But we heard in part 1 that George rode for Trump, especially during the post-2020 Stop the Steal rally, storming the Capitol, etc., etc. And Trump respected and saw that. I think George and Trump, again, had a lot of similarities, both to queens from Queens who had no political experience, who hustled their way into the White House. And Trump's a liar too. So he's like, hey guys, he's not that bad. If we condemn this man, then people might want to condemn me. They might be looking at my charges on my campaign records that were under $199.99. They might start looking for those receipts. George, while he was in prison, was writing for a local North Shore of Long Island paper that, of course, Trump is reading. And that's really where Trump was learning about what was happening to George while he was in prison. And Trump said, George has been in solitary confinement for long stretches of times, and by all accounts has been horribly mistreated. Therefore, I just signed a commutation releasing George Santos from prison immediately. Good luck, George. Have a great life. And so at this point, George doesn't really know what's happening. He hears it on the television that he is going to be released from prison, but nobody has told him anything. Around 11 p.m. that night, he was released. His husband picks him up, and who is his first call? His bestie, Marjorie Taylor Greene. And I wonder how George feels that she's no longer sucking Trump's dick. I wonder whose side George has taken, Marjorie's or Trump's? Probably Trump. But my one other favorite little thing to find out that George did directly after getting released was, of course, he took a long shower, duh. But he also said, babe, order me some sushi. And that, too, would probably be my post-prison meal as well. I feel like that's also going to be, a thing I do when I have a baby. I'm going to be one of those moms with, an infant still covered in goo, and I'll already be on my third platter of sashimi. But again, just another thing that George and I have in common. We love sushi. And although George had 23 felonies on record, George had many other scams and schemes, some dark, some silly. And so let's dig into them a little bit right now. So in an interview on WNYC, he stated that, okay, I don't really know why I'm laughing at this, but he said that his company, which question mark, you don't have a company he did not identify, I should mention, lost 4 employees at the Pulse nightclub shooting in Orlando in June of 2016. However, none of the 49 victims appear to have worked at the various firms named in his biography on the government's website. He said it was presented that 4, agreed upon hires that would be onboarded to the company had perished that day. What are the odds? Also, again, he's in Florida, Pulse nightclub, running for office in New York. His ties with Florida need to be studied in a part 3. I will not be doing a part 3, do not worry. George claimed to have aided kids with genetic disorders. He found this rare and serious genetic disorder affecting children's skin called epidermolysis bullosa, or known as EB, a very, very rare and serious skin disorder. So rare, in fact, that only a small handful of charities actually work with children with this disease. Reporters at Vice, after this entire thing blew up in George's face, reached out to every EB charity in the United States to check if there had been any association with George Santos. Of course, not the case. And George, you couldn't have picked breast cancer. It's a little bit easier to lie about because there are so many charities that donate to breast cancer research instead of a rare and serious children's skin disorder. Santos told a former roommate in 2023 that he was a model who would soon appear in Vogue and had also worked at New York Fashion Week. George considered himself quite a fashionista, and he said, quote, he used to go to the Met Gala. No, you didn't, George. Again, love you, mean it, but you're not going to be in Vogue, you're not working in New York Fashion Week, and you sure as hell are not getting an invitation directly by Anna Wintour. It's not happening. George Santos claimed to have survived an assassination attempt. Supposedly, he said this in an interview with Radio Novello A Presenta shortly after his election in November, although he did not elaborate on this alleged murder attempt. There's so many just horrible things happening to this poor guy. In 2008, when George was 19, he stole the checkbook of a man his mother was caring for, according to Brazilian court records uncovered by the New York Times. Police and court records show that George used a checkbook to make fraudulent purchases, including a pair of shoes. 2 years later, George did confess to the crime and was later charged. Again, this was not told to anybody in America while he was running for public office. This isn't particularly a scheme, it's just disgusting. George compared himself to civil rights pioneer Rosa Parks in many interviews, saying he refuses to sit in the back of Congress while he is dealing with the possible fraud charges. And, he then goes on to say, like, Rosa Parks is one of my idols. I have a photo of her framed in my office. George, honey, you are not persecuted in the way that Rosa Parks was persecuted. Let's not conflate the two persecution levels. Come on. In 2016, George Santos was also involved in a credit card stealing scam with a buddy of his in Brazil. Supposedly, there was a warehouse that they would steal ATMs and then somehow find a way to clone credit card information from the ATMs. His former buddy got in trouble and ultimately ended up pleading guilty. And George said he didn't do it and somehow just got away scot-free. In 2017, George Santos was charged with theft in Pennsylvania after $15,000 of bad checks were given to Amish dog breeders. He'd basically buy dogs with fake checks and then resell those dogs. And, it would take a minute for the Amish people to cash the checks and figure out that they were bouncing and that there was actually no money tied to those bank accounts. I love George's ability to get into any industry for cons. He said, I'm going to take advantage of these Amish people because Amish people don't use online banking. So it's going to take a few days after, George has left with the dog and left the check there for them to realize that they got hoodwinked by George Santos. George said that he had a tax-exempt organization called Friends of Pets United that was a charity that helped animals. Again, another way of collecting money from people looking to give back while ultimately taking all of the money that people have donated. He said in his campaign biography that he had founded and ran this nonprofit and was effectively able to rescue 2,400 dogs and 280 cats. George, I'm sorry, but with what infrastructure are you rescuing close to 3,000 animals? It's just not adding up. He had also been accused of funneling money intended for another animal charity and taking all of the funds. He had the audacity to mess with a veteran and his pit bull, Sapphire. He stole about $3,000 from this veteran who was looking to raise money to get a tumor the size of a volleyball removed from his dog. He, was looking for money and I guess somehow linked up with George. George then made a GoFundMe for Sweet Sapphire. And then ultimately George was like, oh, you got to go to my doctor if you really want to use this money. George's doctor ultimately said, I can't help you with this dog. It's too far gone. Long story short, the dog dies, the veteran doesn't get a penny from the GoFundMe, and George gets a new pair of Ferragamo sneakers. One pretty big allegation towards him was that he would also help other people supposedly fake their long-term relationships to help them get citizenships. He would take photos of couples in different settings. He would change their clothes, basically to help falsify the records that they would be submitting to the government to get a visa. It's giving 90-Day Fiancé vibes to submit to the government because you need to have many different examples of being with somebody for a significant period of time to actually prove you're a couple, not just, getting married out of convenience so that one person can get a green card. Which, you guys, if you didn't listen to part 1, we talked a little bit about George's marriage to a woman, Uvalda, who supposedly he, was paid $30,000 to marry. George is a man of many talents, many skills, and loves the arts. He said he was a producer for Spider-Man on Broadway, which is really funny because this happens to be one of the biggest shows in Broadway with a negative lore associated with it. It is still the most expensive show on Broadway, costing over $75 million to produce. And then there was also just like a ton of chaos in this show. There had been 6 major injuries on record. One actor who was flying up on a, rope pulley system ended up actually falling 30 feet and fell into the orchestra pit, as well as one person just getting a concussion mid-show because of an accident. So I love that that was the show that George Santos decided that he wanted to be a part of. And honestly, at a certain point, people were only going to that show to kind of see if something would go wrong live rather than, I don't know, admiring the showmanship, the acting, dancing, costume, etc. And honestly, I'm a bit of a rubbernecker, so I could see myself doing something like that. And then we have to talk a little bit about his family background. George said that his family had many homes, one being a gorgeous home on Nantucket. He said their real estate portfolio included 13 properties. We all know that this wasn't true. George grew up in a working class family in Queens, living in apartments. At the time of his mother's death, he was living with her in a small apartment in Jackson Heights, Queens. I don't think George Santos is wearing like his little red khaki pants on Nantucket with those fucking preps. He wants to, and again, that's the lifestyle he's dreamt of, but I don't think that's true. So the fascination and obsession with George Santos isn't just isolated to me. He has really permeated his way into pop culture. And let's be real, in today's world, infamy is just as powerful as fame. It can lead you to book deals, TV interviews, and tons of money-making opportunities. And, is reality TV in his cards? I feel like that could be a great option. Comedian John Oliver proposed at one point that we need to have him on Bravo. He said, the truth is this man has never belonged in Congress. He belongs on Bravo. And John Oliver is a huge Bravo fan. So honestly, I think it'd be a really great idea to get some kind of show involving George Santos. Honestly, there should be some like scammer house where it's like the real world, but it's also like George Santos, Anna Delvey, and a couple of others that we can find along the way. But Bowen Yang portrayed George Santos on an SNL bit. He said, I'm a proud thief, and America just hates to see a Latina queen winning, which is so funny. George Santos said that Bowen Yang deserved an EGOT for that performance portraying him. George Santos even made his way into Jeopardy! Ken Jennings asks, this New York rep lied about where he went to college, allegedly swindled a disabled vet whose dog was dying. And Jennings gave a snarky-ass response saying, I don't get to say this much, but George Santos is correct. The National Bobblehead Hall of Fame mocked George Santos by creating a bobblehead of him featuring a Pinocchio-style long nose. I need to get one for my studio. And when I mean studio, I mean my living room. And then there was an incredible interview with Ziwe. If you guys aren't familiar with Ziwe, she's an awesome pop culture critic. But she starts up the interview just saying, how do you interview someone with no shame? And that's a really, really good question. And, the former congressman was talking with her and didn't know, iconic people in culture like James Baldwin or Harvey Milk, but he was able to spit a Nicki Minaj verse, which makes perfect sense. And honestly, I wonder when we're going to see Nicki Minaj and George Santos team up, because we know George Santos is so close to joining Turning Point. It's just a matter of time. But where is George Santos today? As you guys know, he's out of prison. He's living, laughing, loving with his husband. I'm anxiously waiting for season 2 of his podcast, Pants on Fire, on Spotify. I will say he's a great host. He's funny. He's cheeky. I listened to one episode where he had Olo and Bolo, the two guys who allegedly attacked Jussie Smollett as his guests. And by the way, Jussie Smollett is very much another victim of mine. Honestly, I think I actually have to put him on the docket. I'm sorry for the tangent, but I am almost done with my Hilaria Baldwin prep. So that's a recording session that I'm going to be getting to probably in the next few weeks. I cannot wait to start on that again. It's a doozy. I'm going to be saying the word alleged every 5 seconds in that one because there is some lore about her that I feel like I can get sued for saying. We don't know exactly what George is doing for work at the moment, but he is currently on Cameo. 3 days after being expelled from Congress, he was back. His usual fee is about $300, but he's having a New Year's special, guys. I know this will be out on the 16th, so at this point, I hope it's still only $100 if you order today. You guys do not want to miss out on this deal. But unfortunately for me, I do want to get one, but I also don't like when people are in on the joke when I'm making about them. I think that's mean. I like to be mean in private. I don't like to be mean publicly to George, But in 2024, George embraced his former drag persona, Katara Ravache, again and offered a paid cameo for someone in full drag. I believe that George needs to be bringing back his drag persona and hit the fucking stage. As I mentioned in part 1, there is a bar in Queens called Icon, and one, he's absolutely been there, but he needs to start performing there. Bring back Katara Ravache. We really, really need that. In his interview with Ziwe, she asks him, NARS or Mac? And he said Estee Lauder, because I have to keep my Republican donors happy. And I just thought, that's interesting. Come to find out, Estee Lauder is a massive Republican donor. In his interview with Tucker, he also said he was leaving New York City and will be heading down south South because of Zoran, of course. But like, where is this bitch going? Oh, God. He said he wants to adopt 2 kids, and he said, hey, sure, they could be black. I'll adopt black kids. One of the most confusing things about George Santos was when he was like running around the halls of Congress holding a miscellaneous baby. No one knew whose baby that was. And when reporters said, George, is that your baby? And he said, not yet. What does that mean, George? Where is that baby? He said after being in prison, he wants to fight for prison reform while also saying he's still very against abortion. Thank you so much for reiterating that. I forgot to mention, you guys, George is a parrot owner. I feel like he very much has been training his birds to also speak in Republican jargon. Their names are Chico and Rivera, and again, I don't know why, I just feel like he would be a proud owner of parrots. But what is next for George Santos? I mean, again, he's not doing much right now. So he's really just making cameos. His husband, I believe, was a pharmacist, so he might be providing for the family at this point. We need a book from him in 2026. We also need to get him back in drag. I need Qatar Revenge to be brought back from the dead. And I do need a season 2 of that fucking shit podcast. I'm dying for his hot takes and showmanship. Honestly, I feel like he could come on this podcast and could be a fun guest. But, you know, he's hanging out with his buddies, Anna Delvey, Leah McSweeney, Puke. But he's like a fun guy and probably a great gossip and like so fun to hang out with. So like, again, I think me, him, and Anna Delvey would have a great time out. Again, like I do think we'd end up dining and dashing, but I'm okay with that for the story. And I do think I probably have the most money out of all of them, which is not a good sign for either of them because we're looking pretty bleak these days in terms of commas or zeros in my bank account. So George Santos lied and scammed and schemed and got exactly what he wanted. To ultimately just be seen and heard at any and all costs. He knew that a fantasy version of himself always was going to sell to constituents better than the truth, which is that he's just a normal dude from Queens, rather than this well-educated, impressive, cosmopolitan businessman that he wanted to be without doing any of the work to get there. But in all seriousness, this actually really exposes the vulnerabilities in our political system. You know, how can someone with massive lies win a seat in our United States fucking Congress? You know, what is it about America that has allowed an idiot like him to gain political power and success so quickly? You know, how are these scammers managing to weasel their way into national politics at all? Americans need to wake the fuck up about who they are voting for to stand up for them and represent them in Congress or the Senate or president, whatever. But as much as I hate to admit it, I'll be watching and following George Santos probably to the day he dies or I die, whatever comes first. Again, I won't buy his book, but I support local libraries and I will absolutely read it from the library. But thank you so much for listening to my George Santos deep dive. This was so fun to work on. I'm really excited for another great week of episodes next week. Monday, I'm solo dolo. Wednesday, I'm talking Salt Lake City, Southern Charm, and Traders with an awesome fucking guest. And then at the end of the week, we're going to have some food news. I'm going to have a friend come on, and we're just going to talk about what's going on in the food world because I'm just so fascinated, and I'm sorry. You know, these are my interests. This is my cross to bear. This is all I have in this world. So thank you so much for listening. Thank you for subscribing, following, all of the things. Be sure to follow me at Megan the Podcaster on Instagram and TikTok, mainly TikTok. And I'm on YouTube and Spotify. If you ever want to watch this video or past videos or just make fun of my crooked bottom teeth, I don't mind if you guys make fun of me while also giving me streams. Don't forget, every stream I get pays me 0.00046 cents. So just imagine how many people need to be listening for me to make a living from this. So we're trying day in, day out, and someday this will fucking pop off. And I'm telling you, hoes, when it does, it's fucking over. It's over for you, hoes. So thank you for listening. Have a great rest of your weekend and let me know what you think of this deep dive. Bye. New episodes of the I Know You Didn't Ask podcast are out every Monday and Friday, available wherever you listen to podcasts and on YouTube.